We're going to dive into a hot topic now, the future-proofing Europe, innovation, competitiveness, and the clean industrial deal. My name is Thomas Wens. I'm a researcher at the Brussels School of Governance, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Future-proofing Europe. How, what, when? For the Generation Z on this planet, I think their life has been filled with one crisis after the other, from COVID through energy crisis, through a war at the border of Europe, through tariffs, economic crisis, and now recently we have, let's say, 4 countries or 3.5 countries with nuclear weapons capability fighting each other. We live in uncertain times, and Europe's position in this regard is not very clear. We see the consequences of all these events, but how do we respond? We had a Green Deal. We have a Green Deal. We have a clean industrial deal that is in the process of being implemented. We currently have the ambition to significantly increase defense spending. How will this impact our green agenda? And of course, and that's one of the main issues today, we have our economy that is under stress, and in particular, these sectors that are facing high energy costs, the sectors that are exposed to international trade. We might not be able to answer all questions today, but I'm extremely happy to have 2 experts here that can guide us through this process, through this day. I will ask them some questions and then we will do some freewheeling. If in the meantime you have an urgent question or a comment, raise your hand. Feel free to interrupt so we get it a bit more interactive and then we get this thing going. So who do we have here? My right side, but your left side, that is Neil Makaroff from Climate Perspectives. Strategic Perspectives. We always get your thing wrong. Strategic Perspectives. A director at Strategic Perspectives, and next to him is Florian Anderhuber, director at Euromines, deputy director and director for sustainability at Euromines. But maybe let's start off, because I started off badly. Introduce yourself a little bit. Who are you? What are you doing? And how are you looking at this clean industrial transition?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be able to debate this future-proofing Europe. So my name is Neil. I've been working in the NGO community on climate for 5 years in the past in Climate Action Network France. And since 2022, I co-set up a think tank called Strategic Perspectives, which is a European think tank working on the socio-economic aspect of the net zero transition. So we are very interested in how the transition can help the EU to be more energy secure. How can we build the industries in Europe for the clean tech? How can we manage actually a fair transition as well? So all the social component as well. And the change from the Green Deal to the Clean Industrial Deal, I think in our perspectives, the Clean Industrial Deal is not a change, it's the continuation of the Green Deal. Of course, you have all the debate around the omnibus, but I feel we are living in a very turbulent geopolitical times. You mentioned, of course, the trade war from the US, the fierce competition from China, the wars in Ukraine and elsewhere. And therefore, we cannot do the transition policies the same way as it has been done since 2019. We need to reflect on how do we build the industrial capacities to actually secure our transition, so having more this economic security framework. How do we also ensure that the existing industries can decarbonize concretely, because it's true that we have targets, we have the ETS, but now, for example, if you talk to the steel industry, they will tell you we need the prospect, we need the predictability that we will have a growing market for green steel, so we can invest in the decarbonization of the steel making. So this is all those small things that the Clean Industrial Deal needs to do to make sure that the ambition of the Green Deal is actually turning into a real industrial and economic security agenda. And I'm coming from the climate ecosystem, and I must say we should not be shy to say that there is no economic competitiveness or security without decarbonisation. You hear a lot of political noise around the backlash, but clearly without decarbonisation in Europe, in a continent with limited oil and gas resources, clearly our economy cannot survive. So I think this message should be loud and clear as well to decision makers. And maybe I stop here for now, but
So thank you, Thomas, for inviting me here. What I'm doing at Euromines is voice of the European mining industry. All of our members, we represent 54 different minerals and metals. We do not represent coal, we do not represent oil, neither gas, just to be clear on this one. Our mining companies that are extracting in Europe, and they're extracting the strategic and the critical raw materials that are at the base of all of the technologies that we would like to see in terms of clean tech, in terms of ICT, but also in terms of defense. It felt a bit like a trip down memory lane. So when I saw what you wanted to talk about, I drew up my old notes from when the Green Deal was first proposed, and the communications that were done around it. And it was a growth program. It was Man of the Moon talk and these kind of things. And going through what was written in these communications back in the days. And it was a rather balanced approach, very ambitious but balanced. It took into account all of the elements that would have been needed in order to get to the objectives. I was wondering what happened then. It very quickly started then to be somehow framed in one thing versus the other, industry versus environmental protection versus climate protection. So in a lot of infighting then that recreated certain silos that bogged down the initial ambition and all of the goodwill and the intentions that were there into a granularity. And in requirements that somehow actually slowed then the entire process. Through different mechanisms in the end. Where we are getting, what our perspective was, is that this is an opportunity for us. I'm representing the mining industry. Mining has an impact on the environment, on climate. That's not deniable. But we can do it better. And in Europe, we have the evidence that we do it actually better than in the rest of the world. So why don't we take this opportunity and increase the resilience of the value chains? For those strategic technologies where we would like to see our continent heading. And as you said, without like a decarbonized Europe, without a full electrified Europe, without a hydrogen-based Europe, we will not be able to compete in the long run. Different resources are dwindling. We know all about it. They're weaponized. We also see that. And where I want to get it was that this opportunity somehow was a lost opportunity. And now, with the clean industrial deal that's coming up, it's trying to bring in this competitiveness angle again that was promised actually from the beginning. So this is not like one versus the other. It's a continuation. I would rather say it's complementary to the initial ambition there. And all of the major blocks are already there. So it's just what are the complementary effects that we somehow manage to bring it into a competitive, into a framework for competitiveness. And there we have three major elements. And they're always the same. You need to have inputs, you need to have a market, and you need to have access to finance. And this thing somehow was omitted in the implementation phase or in various negotiations. And I have three questions here. Sorry. I need to start again. No, but I'm very sorry. I really am. As a summary, I just give you an executive summary now. Clean Industrial Deal is complementary to what the Green Deal initially proposed. It tries to operationalize the original ambition that somehow was lost over the last 5 years, that the very first communication on the Green Deal was actually promising. Mining will be a very essential part of it, and what we need to look into is how to make this competitiveness triangle somehow work, because since Europe, and you mentioned it too, we are fully integrated in global markets, all of our value chains are fully integrated, and we have probably one of the strictest competition policies that are around, so we cannot afford to not take into account the three major elements that are essential for a competitive industry or economy or individual enterprise. And this is what is happening on the input side, what is happening on the market, do I have a market, and last but not least, access to funds. If one of these elements is breaking away, then we will have an issue.
Thank you. You made some interesting points. I'm also going to talk closer about the history of the Green Deal, Green Industrial Deal. Maybe let's take a few steps back. We had a very ambitious climate commission previously, also before Paris agreements, targets that increased Fit for 55. What has changed to bring competitiveness, industrial deal more and higher on the agenda? Maybe Neil, you can start off.
Yeah, happy to. I think definitely the geopolitical turbulences, if I may say, have clearly impacted this Green Deal agenda. What is interesting is the Green Deal has been turned into a solution to the multiple crises the EU have faced the last 5 years. For example, after the COVID pandemic, Ursula von der Leyen said, we are going to use the recovery plan, 37% of the recovery plan, to finance the Green Deal. It was about 300 billion euros over the recovery plan period. Then after the war in Ukraine, we launched REPowerEU, which is the plan supposed to complement the Green Deal and to boost renewables and efficiency and also energy savings, because we were facing a clear shortage of Russian energy, mainly gas. We discovered that it was maybe not a good idea to be dependent on Russian gas. Now, maybe we will discover that it's maybe not a good idea to be dependent on US gas, but we'll see. So the Green Deal has been framed as a solution to those crises. Now, with the Clean Industrial Deal, we enter a new phase, I feel, because basically, with the Green Deal, we created a favorable environment for attracting investment in Europe in net zero manufacturing. For example, you had 20 billion euros invested in the battery manufacturing in Europe the last couple of years, and it clearly changed the landscape. If you go to the north of France, you will see the battery manufacturing arriving while it is a very highly disindustrialized region. So for the first time in the history of this region, we reversed the disindustrialization trend with the net zero transition. And I think this is a fantastic message, actually. The problem is, this is very shaky, because we face a very fierce competition from China. China is subsidizing the production of clean tech, of net zero technologies and products. It's also dominating the value chain, which means that it enters the European market with overcapacities and a very, very competitive price. For example, a battery made in China is 32% less expensive than a battery made in Europe. So on a pure market-based economy, you cannot expect the battery sector to resist in Europe. You will outsource the battery sector to China because it's more cost-effective. And this is where we need the Clean Industrial Deal, is to change the logic, to not think about the cost-effectiveness and not outsourcing the clean tech sectors to China, but to try to keep those sectors in Europe. It might cost a bit more, but it brings more benefits in terms of jobs, but also in terms of economic security. If we are not able to produce batteries, then when China will invade Taiwan, or when China will decide to cut supply to the Europeans for batteries or for critical materials, then our energy transition is really challenged or even under threat. So it's very important for those security reasons that we are able to put all the measures under the Clean Industrial Deal to secure that we will have a clean industry in Europe. And that might be more expensive than if we completely outsource it to Southeast Asia or China, but the security benefits, security dividends behind it are very high. So this change of the geopolitics basically has brought the Commission to this acknowledgement that we cannot be the naive in the room, that we need also to play with a similar policies as others. And this is a kind of a shift of paradigm as well, and I will stop on that, because when you read the Clean Industrial Deal, for the first time I've read the need for a European preference on strategic technologies. I mean, having the European Commission writing a European preference on an official document, for me, it was really the first time. To have also more investment for the production of technologies, so supporting with subsidies some critical sectors. Then you can define what is a critical sector, of course, but I mean, it's there. So it's a change of a paradigm for the European Union. Now we will see if it will be implemented and if we won't have all the rollbacks that some political parties are also pushing. So it's very uncertain. We will see with the first legislative proposals, with the first investment plan, whether it's actually operationalized into concrete policies. But I think the initial ambition is really to make sure that the transition that the Green Deal is pushing, it can be made in Europe as well. And I think this is a key thing for the economic security, but also for the social cohesion.
Okay, thank you. Florian, I'm going to ask you a question of things that are quite close to your heart, maybe even. When we look back at the history, how this competitiveness concern and the response to that came higher up the agenda, I think we can't ignore the Draghi report, which is a critical, interesting document, and also the Antwerp Declaration, of which your sector is part of. How did your industry look at the Draghi report? Is it looking at the right problems? Does it provide good remedies? And what do you expect from the Antwerp Declaration?
Okay. The Draghi report is a seminal piece of work. It's asking the right questions. It's giving very, very concrete answers. The issue is that most of the people haven't read it from page 1 to page 700 something, I think. So, but it's a
lot of pictures.
And graphs. But it is a worthwhile read. I would really recommend everyone to read it because it's not addressing, or it's not changing the basic tenets. It keeps with the objective. It sticks with the objective that we would like to see. And those objectives, when it comes to climate neutrality, it's the law. It is written down. It's a regulatory trajectory that has been set in motion. But it tries to provide the tools to do it in a most cost competitive way that is possible within the framework that we see in the EU. And yes, we overslept somehow battery manufacturing. The Northvolt story, I think, is a very, very telling tale of technology dependency, not raw material, technology dependency from China, a bit too ambitious scaling up plans, and then the financial sector stepping out again tilting the triangle I mentioned before between input materials, in this case technology, access to finance, and whether you have a market, so in the offtake agreements, into a vicious cycle that in the end led to the downfall and the bankruptcy, the Chapter 11 procedure that this company had to go in. What Draghi did is trying to provide like a systemic view on how to avoid this, and also how to avoid this with the least subsidies possible. Because the problem is that when we have subsidies, you can't create a business case. There is no serious enterprise that is creating a business case based on subsidies or certain measures at the border, such as sanctions or tariffs, because these can change from one legislature to another. So you have to somehow stay competitive within the cost structure that there is. And then for my sector, the raw material sector, the issue is we have to be cost competitive on a global market. So prices are set on a global market, and there is depending on what sector you're looking at, for consumer products is different than for raw materials, a certain bargaining power that comes with it. And the smaller this bargaining power gets, the stronger the ability of certain actors, let's name it China, to occupy this space and to bargain on their own behalf and to price certain other sectors out of the business. That's what they've been doing. They've been doing this with a heavy rare earth value chain. They've tried doing this with the lithium with the lithium value chain. Batteries, solar panels. We all know the solar panel story here. So they're very, very skilled at this. And Draghi is trying to find this remedy here. So really look at it. It looks at raw materials. It looks at clean tech manufacturing. It looks at the avoidance of subsidies. It also makes very clear that there's certain ideas that we cherished very much in peace times when it comes to what competition law should look like. Every single element of a value chain has to be competitive with every other single element of the value chain in a global market is not tenable anymore. And here we see now a very, very strong shift also in the thinking. So this Draghi report, and I would even go a bit earlier back in the history. The first piece that really looked into this was the Critical Raw Materials Act. That was actually the first piece. Draghi report is expanding this. It's reflected now in the Commission work program, and it's reflected in the omnibuses, and it's now trickling down to the different services. DG Competition asking for, is there a possibility for a vertical value chain cooperation between sustainable or responsible extractors, producers, down to the battery cell manufacturer or the semiconductor manufacturer? This was unthinkable a year ago. So we have these solutions. These solutions can be, those are quick fixes that can be quite easily implemented in the end. Now we have like 4 more years to go to bring them there.
Thank you. Also, picking a bit up on the Draghi report and also on the concerns by heavy industry towards the transition, the Antwerp Declaration, we see electrification coming back as a major solution. The mining sector already quite heavily electrified, but there we have this conflict with relatively high electricity prices in Europe versus, in particular, the US, maybe a little less China. Also, CO2 taxes included, other regulatory taxes including electricity prices. Is our own regulation, our own market system, when it comes to electricity, not killing the transition?
Very good question. It's super interesting to see that electrification is a very trendy topic nowadays. But you have no politician outlining a very strong electrification support plan, neither at the European level nor at the national level. And this is actually the contrary, because when you look at some countries like France, the tax on electricity is higher than tax on gas. And this is the case in many member states, you can check. So the fiscal tools that member states have and the policy that the Commission is also designing are not in line with the electrification goals that we are supposed to have. If we want to reach a 90% climate target in 2040, we are supposed to electrify 50% of our economy. Today we are stagnating at 21%. While China, again, sorry to mention the elephant in the room, but China is reaching almost 30% of its economy electrified. And based on that, they are building a complete industry of clean tech, solar panels, batteries, and they are taking the technological leadership. This is thanks to this strong and fast electrification pathway. So today we clearly need a roadmap for electrification, and I think the signal of the 90% climate target will be very important for that, and I do hope that the Commission will propose the amendment to the European climate law, and then it will be adopted very swiftly by member states and the European Parliament, obviously, because this is the beginning on how do you plan the electrification. And then you need to plan the electrification on how do you electrify the different sectors. Of course, the automotive industry, for example, the CO2 standards is a great example, but it's under attack. The same for the building sector. Now you have the industry segment, which is a very interesting one, because you see more and more industrial players electrifying their production because of energy prices. Because they know that gas is extremely volatile in terms of prices, especially when you depend on LNG, liquefied natural gas, because liquefied natural gas is set on international energy markets. So the price can jump from one day to another if you have a crisis, and therefore it can hurt very much your industry or your business model as a company. And that's why you have the glass industry nowadays investing to electrify their business case. The same for the paper industry. Not very much for other industries, but we see good examples of industries saying at some point, now the electricity business case is not very high, but we know that at some point gas might be a dangerous and toxic energy to fuel our industry, so we prefer swifting now to electricity because in the midterm we will be more competitive than the others. And this is exactly what the glass industry is doing in some member states. They are investing in electrification. And this is actually key because by 2040, this is the chunk of emissions we can avoid thanks to the electrification of the industry is great. And another thing which is promising for the European economy is we are still the leaders on the industrial heat pump segment. I mean, north of Italy, the south of Germany are the regions producing industrial heat pumps. And those industrial heat pumps, I don't know if you've seen them, they are massive, they are very big, and they are really here for electrifying the industrial use. And if we need to give an incentive on electrification for the industry, so we can also favor this industrial heat pump segment. Otherwise, they will just decline as the other clean tech because we won't create the demand and the market for it. So electrification, yes, clearly. Then electricity prices, just a last word. The midterm is if we decarbonize our electricity mix, obviously we will be more resilient to price shocks on international gas markets. And you can take the example of Spain, which is a bit a separate example because they are not very linked to the European electricity market. In Spain, the electricity prices are 45 lower on average than the rest of the EU. And this creates a strong attractions for companies to start locating in Spain. And that's one of the reasons why CATL, the leading Chinese battery manufacturers, decided to put 4.1 billion euros into manufacturing of batteries in the north of Spain. It's because electricity prices, thanks to renewables, are very cheap. So I think there is not so many options for Europeans. If we want to electrify, we need to decarbonize the electricity mix very quickly.
Florian, if I may, thank you. And this was I will come back to a few points you mentioned later. We've seen that the Commission also acknowledges the high electricity costs and prices in Europe. There's been a response, a legislative answer to this. In the Clean Industrial Deal, has it been sufficient? Green PPAs, things have been proposed there?
So direct or indirect electrification, let's take both of them together here. Yes, this is the solution. Mining industry, we did our homework to quite a large degree. Metals mining, so 75% decarbonized and through direct electrification. And one thing that has to be considered here as well is it's not just the cost of energy here, that you also have certain efficiency gains. Direct electrification is much more efficient for everything that has to move. Simple as that. iron ore mining in Europe, 90% electrified. So this is all moving in the right direction. And this, I would say, despite the electricity system, the electricity market design that we have at the moment. What China is doing different, because you mentioned it before, is it considers electricity as a public good. And like this, it can temper with the price. It can subsidize it, whatever you want. Whereas since the third energy package, we have like a market-based system here, where different other costs are coming in. Not only the taxes. Yes, the taxes are high, and there needs to be a tax incentive to electrify. But then also, what are for baseload consumers that need to have like a very constant input, that do not have too much flexibility in the consumption profile? What can be done there when they have, for example, to shape their agreement with power purchase agreement provider? So and there we will still see issues, because what the CO2 cost has been passed through in the electricity price for most of the time now. This new revenue stream that's coming up is those shaping and firming costs. And shaping and firming is what is determining in the end your offtake agreement for electricity.
So shaping and firming is like the additional costs company stays to get a stable supply compared to the market.
Yeah. And while we have in certain instances negative electricity prices for an hour or so, we also have those spikes sometimes. And we tied ourselves now in this marginal pricing system from one commodity, which was Russian pipeline gas, to another commodity, which is LNG. And we only need to wait for a certain rebounding of the Chinese economy, and the LNG ships will seem to divert it away to where they get the highest price for it. The highest price is still the hub in Shanghai. That's paying for it, not the European hubs in this case. So for electricity to make this work, or to incentivize it further, certain structural changes would be necessary. That's a question.
Two questions.
Sure.
Okay. Let's start front.
Getting lively.
You can. Okay. There should be a roving mic somewhere. My cable isn't long enough.
In the interest of time, Claire suggested I pop up here and ask my question quickly while the roving mic is being found. I wondered, in the interests of sort of synthesis and of project kind of, because I know certainly in academia we're sometimes a bit guilty of staying in our silos. So I was wondering, could you reflect on some of the themes from the first round table? So I'm thinking in particular, if you want to future-proof Europe, of course, maybe a democratic view of what innovation is, what competitiveness is important. And I'm thinking, for example, for you, Neil, we talked about citizens in assemblies. And of course, their citizens are both consumers, but also trying to move beyond in their imagination of what might be, a sustainable way of living or a way of doing policy, or maybe changing the boxes of what we mean by innovation and competition, and particularly, questions around just transition and should we be trying to catch up with places like China, or should we be redefining what we want to do and how we want to live? So how do you speak to those kinds of strategic perspectives? And very quickly,
it's a lot of questions.
Sorry. Participation, perhaps, Florian, could you speak something to some of the controversies around citizen participation also in industrial and mining decision making, particularly in environmental impact assessments? I'm thinking of lithium in Serbia. Thank you.
Claire, go ahead.
You want me to ask? Okay. Thank you, Louisa, for stealing my question. My name is Claire Dupont. I'm a professor at Ghent University. I first wanted to draw attention to a report that was released in April by the European Academy's Science Advisory Council that was all about the security of energy, the security of sustainable energy supplies in Europe. And one of the key findings is we need to do a lot more on electrification, also for a security dimension. So it's not only from a competitiveness dimension. So there are lots of co-benefits in that discussion, and that, of course, also has implications on the environmental and sustainability side. But my question was also about, in fact, I had like 5, but I'll limit myself to 2. So one of them was about this idea of the CID being complementarity or a continuation of the European Green Deal, but I would rather see that it takes a very specific type of framing of the transition, and that is very what I would call techno-economic, and it doesn't have the same sort of systemic, inclusive, democratic vision that we had in the European Green Deal. So I would like to challenge you a bit in that, and I think that builds on what Louisa is saying. It also, I think, arguably doesn't align with the 8th Environmental Action Programme goal of getting to living well within the limits of the planet as quickly as possible. And then a second question that I have is on phase out. So a lot of the justifications that I'm hearing on the panel for why the change is happening is market-based, how the market goes, the prices of things. And there's very little in the CID that explicitly mentions the need to phase out unsustainable practices. And there we're talking about the role of the state, right? The role of regulation. So how do you view the need to further implement phasing out of unsustainable practices, and what that means for certain sectors, certain products, what it means for the consumption patterns that we have in Europe, and also, how would industry respond and think about that? Thank you.
Okay, let's try to get structurally through the questions, or to some of them, the ones you feel most comfortable about answering. But I think the dimension of citizen participation in this context is important. From the work we have been doing, we see a huge gap in what citizens know about industrial transition and what is actually happening. I often make the joke of the urban legend of schoolers who were asked in New York, where does milk come from, and they answer from the supermarket. I think we have similar lack of or gap of knowledge of where metals come from. Where does the iPhone come from? What is the value chain? Of course, it's complicated, but this is an element, I think, that explains part of this gap. But Neil, you can answer, or Florian, whoever wants first.
On this one I would like to start. So yes, citizen participation and the social dimension of any kind of mining project, the social acceptance of it, this is the make or break situation of any kind of project. So, there are really in every member state or every region very specific requirements to engage with citizens, and companies have to follow it. Otherwise, it's not possible to obtain a permit. And the question is, how can these what is happening then during these kind of consultation periods, and what is given back to the community? And there are then different ways to, and every project there is structured differently, to look into profit sharing, to provide an outlook beyond the mine lifespan. So what if the mine is then out of ore in 20 years? What is happening then? And then also, what is the design in the post-closure phase of a mine? This is also very important. What can be done with the land afterwards? And there normally, what's happening is that there is a commitment, there is a fund being set up by the companies themselves to bring it back to some productive element, productive piece of land. And this is working in most of the jurisdictions quite well. And you have certain cases where things didn't go that well in the initial phase. You wanted to know more about lithium mining in Serbia. This is a very interesting case because it didn't start out to be a lithium mine in the first place, and it also is in a setup where the largest Chinese state-owned mining company 100 kilometers away is digging around there as well since already 30 years, leaving behind a huge environmental impact. So there were like different kind of information pieces that got together somehow, and by simply ticking the boxes and not engaging with the local community, this took its very own life. In the end. And once this is happening, and once you do not do this from the beginning in the right way, you cannot put the genie back into the bottle. So what we see is when companies do it correctly, in the right way, starting from day one, engaging with the communities, providing an outlook, providing an agreement in terms of profit sharing, providing also other benefits that come with a mining operation, such as improved infrastructure and so on, in a holistic package, this is then working out rather well. And also another question is the mine design. There is something you have to put a lot of time into the design here. Does it have to be an open pit mine, or can it be an underground mine? Do you need to have transportation ways through a forest, or can you go around it? It's in these questions that actually can be solved when you are listening to the communities that know the land probably best there. Another thing is local employment. It's very important. In existing mining regions, you do not really have this not in my backyard attitude, because the people are employed by the mine. It's then the further away you go, then the more critical a mining operation is then being getting considered. And the last point, on the social acceptance side, it's not only the mine. If you do not start clustering, and this is, for example, one of the criticisms that I have with strategic projects, if you do not start clustering, people will only see a hole in the ground and a huge pile of waste. But if you start clustering, you would end up with, suddenly people can hear me. When you start clustering, you know, you have a mine, you have a refining, a smelter and a refiner, and then in the end a semiconductor factory next to it. Then you have suddenly a value chain where there's much more added value there than simply the extraction phase of it. And this is what is important, because this kind of value added has a much longer impact than the 20, 30, or maybe 100 years the hole in the ground will stay around. So yes, the social dimension is a hugely important part in any kind of permitting procedure. And so, yeah, what I can say here.
Okay, Neil, with your background, I'm sure you have some very interesting insights to share here on this topic.
Yes, I have a brutal answer to the three questions actually, is political majorities. The problem we face today not only in the European Parliament, where we have basically the center right, which is a kingmaker and can do coalition à la carte with the far right or with the center left and Renew. We also have that in the Council, and we have it in most of the member states. And this leaves little room of maneuver for our agenda, to be very honest. And that's why I do believe that we should not be shy to call the decarbonisation agenda a security, a competitiveness, or whatever words you want to put this. We need to be kind of pragmatic when you want to sell it. Simply because, in realistic terms, the decarbonisation agenda is as security dividends, as competitiveness dividends, and there are plenty of proof points for that. So I agree with you, the Clean Industrial Deal is not as holistic as a European Green Deal, but unfortunately we are living in a more conservative political majority, where it's very hard to tackle emissions from agriculture, from forestry, to for instance nature, and therefore we have an issue with the industry, and I do believe that we can find a political majority in this very complex setting if we try to support the European industry while decarbonizing. I have one example. ThyssenKrupp, which is a major steel maker, they want to decarbonize, but they don't know if they will have the green steel market in Europe. I'm pretty sure that the center left, the center right, Renew, and others could agree on a compromise to how do we grow the green steel market in Europe, so we make sure that ThyssenKrupp or ArcelorMittal are staying in Europe and decarbonize. This could be it sounds very techy, it sounds very pure industry-based, but I'm sure those kind of measures can make progress of the net zero transition and at the same time gather a majority. For the phase-out of fossil fuels or environmentally bad practices, I think this is the same issue. Electrification can be a very strong narrative that can bring the majority. I'm pretty sure of that. Simply, we did model that 50% electrification pathway by 2040, and the modeling shows that we can save 850 billion euros of import of gas, oil, and coal by 2040. So it's a huge savings for the European economy. And I'm pretty sure that we can gather a majority around this. But maybe not talking about the phase-out, but more talking about the electrification. So it's another way of framing it, if you want. But yes, maybe climate is not a trendy word anymore. But in this political setting, we need to find other ways to push our decarbonization agenda, because this is clearly, we have no other options as Europeans, to be very blunt. And I will answer the last question on citizen assembly. I'm French, as you can hear. I've been following the citizen assembly in France a lot, and I was very optimistic about it. Unfortunately, I have seen what President Macron has done about it, and the distrust it created afterwards. And I don't have proof points for that, but I'm pretty sure that the fact that all the proposals of the Citizen Assembly were not taken up by the French government and the Parliament afterwards created some distrust in the public opinion, and saying that, yeah, we cannot trust this kind of democratic consultation, we cannot trust Citizen Assembly, we cannot even trust our representatives. And therefore, let's vote for anti-democratic parties. And to be honest, the problem with citizen assemblies is they are still in the hands of governments, and they do whatever they want with the results and the outcome. And I know it was a strong debate you had in the previous session. I'm wondering, how do we make sure that the outcome of those citizen assemblies is actually binding for decision makers? And this is not a given all majorities we have in member states. I'm not sure the French government or the French National Assembly will agree to give up its power to a citizen assembly and completely take the outcome without filter, as Macron said. So that's a bit the limit I see, and I agree. I mean, this is a huge debate, but yeah, it doesn't prevent us from doing more citizen consultation assemblies and to do them more bottom-up, if I may say, because this is maybe where we can regain traction into the debate and the agenda. But when it's very institutionalized, I've experienced it in France, and it was very, very painful at the end. But yeah, that's my take. I'm not a specialist on that, but yeah, that's my take.
Florian, something to add?
Net savings or gross savings from imports?
Good question. I think this is a cumulative savings of oil, gas, and coal from 2025 to 2040 when we did model it.
Primary energy.
Primary, okay.
Yeah.
And juxtaposed to the cost of grid expansion, of renewable expansion, I mean, this would be an actually really interesting figure.
Yes, then we also had an investment figure that we did model with Cambridge Econometrics, which was around 668 billion euros of investment needed in the next 10 years to support the industrial decarbonization mainly. So it also included the grid expansion, especially for the electrification of the industry.
Okay. I see two more, three, four. Wait, let's go first the bottom row, and then we go up to Simon, and then we end up on the fourth. And well, I would suggest in taking time into context, keep your questions short and to the point, not the comments and so on. Go ahead. Okay, the mic is still on the way.
Hi, Alessandra is my name. I'm from DCU, and I'm working on the Retool project precisely on citizens' assemblies. And I'm actually talking to stakeholders who have been involved in the citizens' assemblies in Ireland. And actually this aspect of whether the recommendation should be mandatory came up. And I thought the one person that I talked to about this had a good point, because she said, I don't think that should be the aim of a citizens' assembly, because of rendering these recommendations obligatory and mandatory, because that could actually erode legitimacy, because these are non-elected members. So the most important thing is that the government does give reasons for why those recommendations haven't been taken into account, because obviously governments have to balance different interests, and not just climate or environmental protection, but obviously other interests. So I thought that was a good point, and I would probably question whether recommendation should become mandatory. I would be skeptical of that. So I just wanted to raise that point.
Thank you. There were two questions over there. I think Simon.
Hi, Lisa Jensen from the European Parliamentary Research Service again. I wanted to ask specifically on the upcoming green label under the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act. That's a long one. Do you believe it will make a difference? I mean, there's a lot of talk about the public sector procurement. I don't know how big a share the public sector holds in relation specifically to mining products or whatever. But, will this make a difference? Do you think it could help for our future-proofing European industry as well?
Cool. Let's put a pin in that. I'll go to Simon and then I'll come back to the panel.
Hi, Simon from the VOB. Thanks a lot for the very interesting discussion. I have a question on China, since it comes up every time in these discussions about competitiveness and the future of European industry, mainly as the biggest challenge. But they also seem to be getting a lot of things right, because they can really challenge us and have driven clean tech a lot forward in the past years and decades. So my question is, what can we, as Europe, for the European policymakers, what can they learn from China, given obviously the very strong differences in political systems and predispositions?
Good. Okay, I'll bundle these questions to both of you. Procurement, will it work? And what can we learn from China?
All right. On the label and procurement, so public procurement is about 30%. This is a very, very large chunk. And procurement markets are fully open, so everyone in the world can bid on them. Having such a label, yes, would be definitely helpful to at least guide consumers, be them public or be they private, to make the right decision of what they wanted. Certain minimum safeguards that might be necessary too. It's like in a supermarket. Put like a supermarket. You buy a paprika in a supermarket, you know it will not kill you. So if you then want to have additional requirements on the paprika, that it's bio or organic, who knows what, this is then your choice. So some kind of labeling system would at least help to understand for the final consumer, where's the product coming from, what was the impact. And these ideas have been around for quite a long time. The question is always, who is enforcing it in the end? Because paper is very patient, and the value chains that we're talking here are very complex. It is not, and the supermarket analogy doesn't work anymore. It's not a paprika that's grown on a farm and then transported to a warehouse and then distributed to a supermarket. It's going through maybe 2 or 3 traders until it's mixed up in a smelter, until it's turning one time around the world before it ends up in a mobile phone that you're buying here. So traceability here will be key. But this can only be one part of the solution, because in the end, what we also know that all kinds of ESG criteria when it comes to raw materials in a purchasing decision is considered as a hygienic factor. no one is willing to pay more for it. So as long as there is a cheap alternative somehow around, and this is getting now to the question of Simon, consumer will instinctively opt for this one here. So how can it be a non-price criterion be used for critical and strategic raw materials? This is maybe something, and going also to the conservatives, to the issue of the conservatives, something that has to be related to our own autonomy. So what is the value of being able to do something by ourselves? And what is the value of doing this something in a better way? And there has been a lot of studies around by the IEA and by the OECD that can draw the direct link between a high ESG performance in the raw material production with the security of the supply, which more or less means that doing this by ourselves in a better way than the rest of the world is automatically increasing the access to the materials that we need. The Chinese model, well, China was very smart. They simply said, okay, there's certain rules of the game, but we change them and do them by ourselves. So we will not beat them at their game. They know their own game so much better than we do. So do we need to engage in this kind of game? And there I would have my doubts that this would be useful. Playing here, catching up. I don't think that this will work out. Again, the battery example. The nickel manganese cobalt battery versus the lithium iron phosphor battery. Well, one is quite expensive and has a very high energy density on the cell level. The other one, not so expensive to make, less valuable materials in there, but it's worthwhile in terms of energy density, not on the cell level, but on the full battery level. So, and like this, it's possible to flood a market by shifting technologies. This is actually very much counterproductive to the circularity of the entire thing, but we would have to deal with it somehow if we engage in this very same game. And then what we would end up with? We would end up with a lot of investments, we would not end up with investments, we would end up with a lot of projects all over Europe that are deleveraged, permitted, that will not get the access to the finance they would need because they will not find the market anymore for the outlet of the product. So a certain degree of autonomy in the sense of we can stand up and walk away from a negotiation table when it comes to China and when it's about defining the rules of the game that China is playing would be very much appreciated in this case.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to give the final answer to you. I'm seeing Teresa getting more and more nervous. So
yeah, I know.
It's
very frustrating because these are two important questions, and I'm passionate about the labeling in the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act. Finally, we are entering a net zero industrial race with the rest of the world, and clearly, I'm not sure the labels will save our industry, to be honest. And that's why in this Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, I do hope that the European Commission will be a bit more brave and a bit bold in terms of proposal, because we need standards. A battery, again, made in Europe is 32% more expensive than a battery made in China. But it's 37% less carbon intensive, which means if we decide to change the rule of the game, not use a price criteria, but use the carbon footprint criteria, then we can level the playing field between a Chinese producers and a European producer.
Use the economic security criterion, that works. And that also works with your conservatives.
And the carbon footprint is very effective as well. I mean, and this is exactly what the NZR started to do, and you can amplify this with the Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act. And I would go even one step further, because some regions in China are able to produce batteries with the same sustainability standards as the Europeans. Then, if you believe that batteries is a strategic technology for the European economy, you put a European preference each time you have €1 of public money involved, being in public procurement, being in bonus for electric cars, being in renewable auctions or whatever. You put a percentage of the added value that needs to be done made in Europe. And this is something that the European Commission is exploring. I started at the beginning saying the Clean Industrial Deal could be a paradigm shift. We'll see if it's the case or not when the legislation is out. But clearly the European preference when you have a strategic industry that you want to save in Europe is something that would cost more at the end, but it can create jobs, security, dividends, and I'm pretty sure that it allows the Europeans at some point to take their share of this new net zero industrial race, which is happening. And when you look at the map, and I will end on that one, when you look at the map of regions and economies using the local content criteria, it's funny because the US use around 900 local content criteria measures in their economy. China is above 30. You have India more 300, Brazil 700. The Europeans altogether 21. So I think it's great to be WTO compatible, but in a world which is not WTO compatible anymore, I think we need to be a bit bolder in terms of industrial policies. So Industrial Decarbonisation Accelerator Act, this is the first legislation of the Clean Industrial Deal. I do hope the Commission will be brave enough to put the European preference and strong carbon footprint criteria that also incentives innovation, by the way, because it forces all the front runners to continue innovate to reduce their carbon footprint.
Thank you. We're going to close off what I remember here, and it might make some of us also uncomfortable that we are, due to the external circumstances, in an era of paradigm shifts and the necessity to be pragmatic in many areas, but also the hope that in the end climate goals and industrial competitiveness, industrial leadership could emerge from Europe. So on this note, I want to thank Neil, I want to thank Florian, I want to thank the audience for a very interesting debate, very interesting questions.